Um, so today, I'm going to talk about my process for filmmaking. I'll talk about the gear that I use, specifically the GH5, but I'll also talk about all the other microphones and everything I use. And I'd love to answer any questions you have. There will be time at the end, but also if I say anything over the next half an hour that inspires you to ask a question, please raise your hand or just interrupt me, that's fine. So, I'm a documentary filmmaker from New York City, and I consider myself a one-person crew or a one-man band. I do everything. I shoot, I edit, I can even do voiceover and be in the piece if I need to. I also consider myself a run-and-gun filmmaker, just because I like to travel pretty light. So really I show up to a shoot with like a backpack with 2 camera bodies, 6 lenses, audio recorder, microphone. Just about everything can fit on my back. I travel with a tripod. This is my travel tripod, but usually I bring a little bit heavier duty Manfrotto tripod. But I like traveling pretty light. I don't need to check bags on the airplane. I feel like I'm given pretty good access because I show up with not too much gear. And like I said, as a one-person crew, I am the director, I'm the shooter, I'm the editor. And I think with this lightweight set of gear, I'm able to do everything myself, and I can get it all done pretty easily. In 2013, I made a documentary called Sriracha. Has anyone seen Sriracha? You've seen it. You've seen it. That was shot on the Panasonic GH3, so I've been using these cameras for several years. And that was shot in 1080, not 4K, but it still looks fine. It looks great. So just to give you a little bit of my background, in 2013, I made this documentary, Sriracha. I made it just because I wanted to make a film. I wanted to be able to call myself a filmmaker. And I really like the hot sauce Sriracha. Who has eaten the hot sauce Sriracha? Okay, a few people, yeah. And I just was curious about it. I made this film for myself, but it turned out making a passion project was the smartest career decision I could have made because it's led to many opportunities since. Right after I made this, I got a job at Bloomberg News in New York City. And so I actually spent the last 2 years covering the presidential election for Bloomberg. This is a piece that I made about Ted Cruz, who was running for president. But I followed Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, everyone who ran for president in the US. I was filming them with the Panasonic GH4 in 4K. And at some point, Panasonic noticed that I've been using these cameras for a long time and I've been making lots of tutorial videos. So they actually invited me to make the first documentary film with the Panasonic GH5. I mean, I think they knew that I would have used their camera anyway, but I was glad that they let me in early. They asked me if I wanted to have a pre-production model back in December, and I said, of course, please give me that camera. So they let me have it very early. I shot this film, and then they even put me in the product video. I'm in like the launch video for the GH5. I'm in several videos for Panasonic, which is really fun for me because I've never been in any product video for anything ever. I've never been the brand ambassador for any product, and now I get to represent the GH5. So I'm very excited because my history with these cameras goes all the way back to 2010 when I picked up a GH1. And I just think it's really cool that in 7 years I went from buying a camera, just trying to save some money and get an HD camera, so I got a camera body, a lens, an audio recorder, a microphone. I was able to do that for about half the price of a HD camcorder. But in 7 years, I went from buying the GH1 to becoming the global brand ambassador for the GH5, which I think is something special about our industry that we're in. This is an industry where you can learn the skills very quickly, and you can turn a hobby into a career very quickly. And you can do it by kind of yourself. You can watch YouTube videos, you can come to workshops, you can pick up these skills pretty quickly on your own. So this is a still frame from Hand Cut. If you want to watch the whole thing, it's on YouTube. It's in 4K 60p. This camera can shoot 4K at 60 frames per second. So I actually decided to shoot a film that way and present it that way. It's a 5-minute film. There's a ton of footage that I captured for it. I shot it over about 2 weeks and filmed 8 hours of footage, which is a pretty normal ratio for me. Sriracha is a 33-minute film, and I shot 32 hours of footage for that. So it's always about 60 to 1 for me. And I just want to talk about the equipment that I use to shoot this film. And if there's anything I don't get to today or you want to reference again later, it's all on my website at griffinhammond.com/gear. You can see the full list of stuff I use. But I'll actually show you the stuff right now that I use, and we'll actually look through the camera at some of the lenses. So right now my setup, like I said, it all fits in this backpack, a Think Tank Perception Pro. I'm able to fit a couple camera bodies, really everything here you see. So I'm shooting with two GH5s. Panasonic was very nice to me and gave me two pre-production GH5s in December. They've since switched me to real ones. Like now I have a serial number on the bottom. The first ones I had were just like the first ones there were, which was fun. My favorite lens to shoot documentaries with is the 12-35 f2.8. I'll actually pop that on right now and you can see what that looks like. I feel like this is just like the perfect documentary lens. It's a focal length I really like. I'll turn up this ISO a little bit. So 12 millimeters is nice and wide for establishing shots, and 35 millimeters is great for interviews. I also just kind of love at 12 millimeters the kind of I'll put myself in the focal area. There we go. I just love kind of the distortion you get on people's faces at 12 millimeters. I really like shooting close to people with wide lenses, and that's just a focal length I really like. It's also an f2.8 lens, so for a zoom lens, constant f2.8, it's pretty good in most situations. And it also has built-in image stabilization, which is why I got it in the first place. I shot most of Sriracha with this lens on the GH3, and I'm still using it today. But one thing they added with the GH5 that makes all of my lenses better is this is a lens that has image stabilization built in, but now they've added image stabilization in the camera. So any lens I put on it, even one that isn't image stabilized, now has its own image stabilization. So if you notice, let's see, I actually have image stabilization turned off right now. We'll turn it on. You notice there's a little hand up top that shows like the shaky hand. That's the image stabilizer. And if I add this lens, it'll switch to, it's still turned off. Oh, this has a switch on it. There you go. Now it goes to dual IS. What's happening is the lens can stabilize itself, the body can stabilize the lens, and we don't want them working against each other. So they actually communicate. The lens sends information to the body, they work together. That's called dual IS, dual image stabilization. So most of my lenses can do that. And just to show you the difference it makes, let me pop on my 12-35 millimeter. It's kind of a good companion lens to the 12-35. Honestly though, I don't use it that much, just because I really like wide angle lenses. I mostly just need the 12-30 or the 35-100 when I'm doing events. So I'm gonna take this off the tripod because I actually do most of my shooting handheld. Let me turn the image stabilizer off, and I'll try to hold this as close as I can and be as stable as possible. But I still have that jitter, especially if I'm shooting telephoto, especially in 4K. There's almost nothing I can do handheld to get rid of jitter. But when I turn the image stabilizer on, it's much better. So back off, and back on. I mean, you especially notice it at 100 millimeters. This 12 millimeter prime is one of my favorites. It's a lens that doesn't have its own image stabilization. It's pretty wide, so arguably it doesn't need it. But every lens I put on this camera on the GH5 is now an image stabilized lens. The body can do it. And this is one of my favorite new lenses. For me, it's one of the lenses I've been shooting a lot recently with. I told you I really like that 12-35 for most documentary work. I really think you could make a whole film with just that lens. But my latest film was shot in a bunch of dark bars, so pretty low light situations. So that's why I pulled out these primes. This 12 millimeter prime is an f1.4 lens. So what is that? That's 4 times more light performance than an f2.8 zoom lens. So I'm doing really well in these dark bars. And I just love the focal length of 12 millimeters here. you can see that I have zebra stripes on this camera, so I'm easily getting plenty of exposure in here at f1.4. I'm even at a pretty fast shutter speed, 1/100th of a second. So the 12 millimeter is one of my favorites, and then the other prime that I've been using in dark situations is this 42.5 millimeter. Which is pretty tight for me. I told you I really like wide lenses. So this one's a little bit, it's not really my shooting style. So I can get a little bit more light performance than the other one. It's a beautiful lens, but it's kind of hard for me to shoot with handheld, so that's why I go with the 12 millimeter a lot. And then the other lens that I use a lot is this 7-14. It's a really wide angle, like fisheye wide angle lens. I use this for establishing shots, for time lapses. Super wide. It's an f4 lens, so it's not going to do as well, but just a really interesting focal length. In fact, pans look really strange with it because it's kind of distorted on the edges. I've actually cut off part of the lens hood here. These flower petal lens hoods stuck out a little bit more on the front, and I chopped them off. I took a saw to the front of this lens, tried not to damage the glass, just because I like to put a ND filter on here. Let me see if I have that handy. I do a lot of time lapses with this lens, and I was getting the ND filter way too close. I mean, as close as I could get it. I slide this thing on, but it was getting, I mean, this is a really dark ND filter. I use it for time lapses outside, and it just wasn't getting close enough to the glass, so I actually cut off a little bit of this lens. You don't need to do that anymore. In fact, you should probably just get the new 8-18 millimeter. It's a Leica lens that just came out. It actually does twice as well in low light as this one. This is an f4 lens. The new 8-18 is an f2.8 lens, and it has a filter ring on the front, so you don't need to cut off part of the lens hood and do this DIY thing that I did. But I love this lens for time lapses. Let me show you some of the shots I've picked up with various lenses. This is a standard interview shot that I did with the 12-35. And then one thing that Panasonic has added, they made this XLR adapter that can go right on the GH5. And here I have my Rode NTG3 microphone, which I do a lot of my interviews with. Traditionally, I would plug that into an audio recorder. I have a Zoom H5 audio recorder, and that's usually how I would do interviews. But now that they've given me an XLR box, I can put a longer XLR cable on here. I can record audio right into the camera. And it has all the settings you would expect. There's audio levels here. It has phantom power. So this is actually my nicest microphone, but it needs phantom power, and I can actually use it with the camera. And it doesn't have to plug into the mic jack. It just goes all through the hot shoe, and it's powered by the camera. So that's a cool thing that really helps me out with interviews. And then let's take a look at, I have several jib shots in the film that I use this thing called the Canova Sun Jib to do these up and down shots. And almost anytime I'm shooting jib shots, I'm using the 12 millimeter just because I really want to see that movement. If I shot those with a tight lens, they just wouldn't look as cool. And then here are some of those 7-14 millimeter shots, like super wide. I use them for time lapses a lot. That's just a digital zoom I'm doing on the time lapse. But for the time lapses, I'm using a tripod. I'm using a really dark ND filter, and I'm using that 7-14 millimeter.